Welcome, everyone, once again to the Tales from the Economicon. I am your host, the Economancer, a high priest of the Economicon. And today we're going to be discussing this crazy thing about socializing risks and rewards. So, before I continue, you should like, share, and subscribe. And the main reason is there's no risk to you, and all the reward is to me. So, obviously, you should do it. Anyway, let's get started. So, as we're getting into this socialized risk, the first thing we got to do is get some definitions down. So, let's look at risk. The most basic definition for risk is the possibility that something bad or unpleasant will happen, right? So Frank Knight, the father of the Chicago School, in his work Risk, Uncertainty, and Profit, defines it as a measurable uncertainty and allows for both a positive and negative outcome. So you have an unknown outcome, but a known probability distribution. There are several other formulations to define risk. You have portfolio theory, Bayesian analysis, and different broad definitions in the psychological literature. However, in this, we're mainly going to stick with the Knightian purpose because it's wide enough to understand risk, economic growth, and entrepreneurship. So to socialize a good, that simply means to place it under government or group ownership or control. Obviously, this idea is closely related to socialist or fascistic principles. Okay, so with the established definitions, how or why does this matter in economics? Well, we're also going to be thinking about the ancillary to socialized risk, which is socialized reward. So the logic here is that the risk or the measurable uncertainty of outcomes becomes spread out across many sectors. This is expected to increase risk taking because an individual will realize more diminutive of the possible loss or adverse effects. But does that actually work? Two things to think about if people are conditioned or habituated to not take risks because government or organizations take the risk. So total risky action declines because it is not in their day-to-day nature. The second is that risk is a signal or a communicated sentiment that tells people the environmental fundamentals, right? So suppose these signals are distorted by socialized intervention. Then, due to the recursive nature of communication, in that case, the underlying message is muddled, noisy, and likely incomprehensible to the average person receiving this information. So, this affects the economic growth and social progression sectors as reduced entrepreneurship. Now, with socialized risks come socialized rewards. One of the most significant rewards of entrepreneurship is being your own boss. However, this no longer happens when risks and rewards are socialized. Thus, the incentives are reduced in becoming an entrepreneur. Next is the monetary payoff. You risk all that you own to succeed. You expect great rewards if you succeed. If the risks are small and the returns are small, why would you take this task on? This is an incentive incompatible set when we socialize those risks. Next is the nature of evolution. An economy isn't a physics realm, it's an ecological realm. So this is the Darwinist versus the Newtonians, right? So in my realm, I take the economy as a Darwinist nested reality. So we have selective pressures modulate an economy or sectors in an economy. However, when the risks and rewards are socialized, less selective pressures activate on stultified firms, and this manifests incumbency bias. So an ecological analogy is that a prey without interaction from predators. A disruption in the environmental balance happens as the population explodes, depleting the resources and degrading the habitat. This is called trophic cascade. And in the Yellowstone, this whole operation was reversed by the reintroduction of wolves. And this also caused behavioral changes in the elk and deer populations. So the same thing happens when companies do not fear entrepreneurial competition when we talk about risk signals getting mixed up. What do I mean? Well, the unintended consequences of perceived safety. All right, so player puts on a helmet in football. This should result in fewer head injuries, yet there's still possibility of an increased spinal injury or equal amounts of head injuries as players are incentivized by the perceived safety to hit harder. Now, to pull this into the economic realm, the risk in the housing and finance market before the '08 crash was considered less risky due to the securitization and collateralized debt obligations. This led to increased systemic risk as the risk was redistributed to those most willing to bear it. The securitization should have been welfare enhancing. Still, the issue became that the risk signal was distorted. So you essentially remove risk from one device or entity. Still, you actually increase the risk to the whole system, which increases systemic failures as we've seen in the '08 crash. This is a common problem faced by the USSR and China before moving towards a more market-based system. To think of this is the agrarian failures in both Soviet Russia and China. Still, it also affects capitalist markets, but typically not in the same manner. So with this, I think I've made a compelling case for limiting the socialization of risk to reward. When we try to think of how best to work in these systems, viability becomes more critical than the socializing of risks. And from this, I want you to take away this idea. This very important distinction is that when we're trying to socialize all the risks, we also necessarily have to socialize all the rewards. And this impedes on individuals acting out based on these risk and reward matrices. And so when you are trying to get past a stultified system, you need Schumpeterian engines of growth. This is motivated by the risk and reward nature that comes in entrepreneurship. When you look at countries across sectors and you see the differences in entrepreneurship and economic growth, it becomes very clear that the more you socialize risks, the less risks people are willing to take. This is a function of habits and habitus. It's also a function of the degree of involvement in transferring capital from one field to the next if you're going through the Bordeaux. When it comes to the systemic or cybernetic thinking, this recursive communication does not get enhanced by the outcomes or the system itself. Anyways, I hope this is a better understanding of what it is to socialize risk and rewards and why I don't think that is necessarily the best way to go about an economy. Like I said, send this to someone, see what they say. I hope you have a wonderful day, and thank you for taking a walk with me through the Economicon.